If lawmakers in Idaho have their way, part of Oregon would become part of what is being called Greater Idaho. Yesterday, the Idaho House of Representatives voted in favor of the Greater Idaho bill. It authorizes Idaho legislators to begin talks with Oregon about moving the state line, including all of eastern Oregon, and leaving places like Bend and Sun River as parts of Oregon. 11 Oregon counties have voted to approve the move to become part of Idaho. Legislators want the Oregon legislature to give the idea a hearing in Salem. Today, Oregon Congressman Earl Blumenauer issued a statement about Greater Idaho saying, quote, "I would entertain a trade for Boise and Sun Valley." So